the front is shifting faster than ever. Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, Siversk, 3 directions, 1 question. Who holds the initiative? Fierce urban clashes, alleged breakthroughs, and fight for every block of terrain. While battles rage, Western aid enters a new phase. Long-range missiles for deep strikes, new air defense systems for the skies, and a massive European package that could change the balance this winter. But while weapons arrive, new diplomacy is unfolding. A controversial plan suggests Russia could pay Ukraine rent for Donbas, and it's already causing conflict between Washington, Europe, and Kyiv. And now the pressure grows. The White House prepares devastating sanctions on Russia's oil sector while Europe targets the shadow fleet, keeping Moscow afloat. All the details in our special edition of Hotspot. Pokrovsk and Kupiansk have become the 2 key hotspots on Ukraine's eastern front. The situation shifts by the hour. Assaults, counterstrikes, advances of assault units, and drone operations continue without pause. In this report, we'll look at what is happening on both fronts right now, which units are engaged, how the situation is shifting, and what these battles mean for the broader campaign.
Pokrovsk played a cruel trick on the occupiers. While the enemy threw all its forces into a desperate attempt to take control of the ruins of the city destroyed by the Russian army, the Ukrainian armed forces launched a counterattack 200 kilometers to the north in Kupiansk. The enemy forces there suffered huge losses, according to the Ukrainian command, and were forced to retreat.
The enemy was cleared out on the northwestern outskirts. They are no longer there, and that's a huge achievement.
In fact, the Ukrainian armed forces have cut off the Russian invaders in the northern part of Kupiansk from their main supplies of provisions, cannon fodder, and ammunition. Next, according to Commander Fedorenko, his unit and adjacent units began identifying the locations of the remaining Russian sabotage groups and clearing them out. As of now, the operation is almost complete.
If you open a map that more or less accurately reflects the line of contact, you'll see that the enemy has been pushed back quite significantly from the northern outskirts. And what does that mean? The farther we manage to push the military enemy from the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, the less room they have to successfully send their sabotage groups into the city itself.
But unfortunately, the Ukrainian armed forces cannot boast of such impressive successes on another of the hottest sections of the front near Pokrovsk, or in the city itself. Russian assaults there do not stop day or night. It seems the Kremlin has thrown all its forces into taking the city. Nevertheless, despite all efforts, the Ukrainian command notes that our defenders are heroically holding the line.
The situation in and around Pokrovsk is extremely difficult, but at the same time we're still somehow holding on.
According to the military, most of the city is now in what is called the gray zone. This is when control over the territory constantly shifts from one side to the other, and fighting takes place for every building entrance. Sirsky also fully understands the complexity of the situation in Pokrovsk. In particular, the commander-in-chief stated that the AFU units and other components of the defense forces continue to carry out their tasks in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration area, despite the fact that enemy activity remains high in this sector.
The enemy remains highly active, but clear coordination and the cohesion of our units help us to resist. We are working to ensure the continuity of our logistics and are taking measures to disrupt the enemy's supply routes.
Nevertheless, the situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains extremely difficult. The enemy, regardless of their losses, continues to assault AFU positions, the commander-in-chief shares in his operational update.
In just the past 4 days in the Pokrovsk direction, the occupiers' total losses amounted to 487 personnel, of which 350 were irrecoverable. The exchange fund is being replenished with captured Russian soldiers.
For security reasons, the Ukrainian command does not disclose further details about the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. However, they can share information about completed special operations on the front line. For example, the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kyrylo Budanov, gave an interview in which he shared details of one of the most daring airborne operations by the GUR, during which special forces, having secured certain positions behind enemy lines, managed to break through and establish a full-fledged ground corridor. Budanov himself was nearby at the time and directed the operation.
Why was such an operation necessary, and why was it carried out in this particular way? Because the situation was extremely tense and critical. I want to remind you that all of this happened against the backdrop of official statements from the Russian Federation about having taken the city, when Gerasimov reported to Putin that the city had been captured. And here you need to understand what the situation was like at that moment. Nothing else would have worked. What we did allowed us to gain precious time so that the main units of the armed forces could calmly, or as calmly as possible, approach the city to reinforce it. Let's put it that way.
It's possible that even as we speak, special units of the GUAR are carrying out another special operation in the Pokrovsk direction. Military public channels are already reporting on the clearing of Pokrovsk, strikes on enemy supply lines, and the establishment of alternative logistics routes now for the Ukrainian armed forces. So all we can do now is wait for official confirmation of the good news from the Ukrainian command.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Russian forces have allegedly broken through Ukrainian defenses in the city of Siversk in the Donetsk region. If confirmed, such a move could shift the tactical situation on this axis, as Siversk is a key logistical junction connecting several defensive lines. However, there is still no official confirmation of these claims. In this report, we examine what is currently known about the situation around Siversk, which units may be involved, and what impact a potential breakthrough could have.
On the night of November 20th, Ukraine attacked one of Russia's largest oil refineries, the Ryazan refinery, for the second time in a week.
Of course, that's good.
In addition, explosions were heard in Novomoskovsk-Tula region. There was also a fire at a substation in the city of Rilsk-Kursk region, which caused power outages.
This refinery primarily supplies fuel and lubricants to Moscow and the Moscow region, and is key not only for providing gasoline and diesel fuel, but also the corresponding motor oils. This refinery is affiliated with the Ministry of Defense of the occupying country, currently providing logistical support with fuel, motor oils, and other components.
The Russians cannot hide or conceal their military targets, neither on their own territory nor in Ukraine. In this footage, a Ukrainian Air Force F-16 is chasing a Russian Kh-101 missile, which is once again on its way to kill someone. The news appears to be reported by Bild's military analyst Julian Rybka. According to his information, the Russian army has broken through in Siversk, Donetsk region, allegedly capturing 20% of the territory.
In the Kupiansk alignment direction, the occupiers have indeed concentrated a strike group numbering about 90,000 personnel. This is considered one of the enemy's strongest strike groups after the Pokrovsk direction. The occupiers' strategic objective is to create conditions for a flanking encirclement of the positions of Ukraine's defense forces. The situation is difficult, but to say that the occupiers have achieved significant tactical successes, or moreover, that they currently control a substantial part of Siversk, this information has not been verified.
Only Trump and the United States have the power to finally end the war. Turkey is ready to provide a platform for negotiations. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky.
If Russia does not come to the negotiating table on American terms after the ATAK-MS, the Ukrainian side may be supplied with Tomahawk cruise missiles, which have a range of up to 1,600 kilometers.
The chairman of the board of directors of Airbus, René Aberman, at the Berlin Security Conference, suggested that European countries consider deploying tactical nuclear weapons to deter Russia.
This is an element of military political pressure by the United States on the Russian Federation precisely at the moment when peace agreements to end the war in Ukraine might be signed. In other words, they are making it clear what further scenarios may unfold if the Russian Federation does not come to the negotiating table. That is, the United States, through its European partners, is already signaling to the Russian Federation that they will continue the policy of increasing nuclear presence on the European continent.
The possible deployment of tactical nuclear weapons is a response to the threat posed by Russian Iskander missiles deployed in Kaliningrad and Belarus, which are capable of carrying tactical nuclear warheads.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced the transfer of long-range missiles to Ukraine, weapons capable of striking targets far behind enemy lines and disrupting Russian logistics and command hubs. Ukraine has also received its first Terrahawk Paladin air defense systems designed to counter drones, low-flying aircraft and cruise missiles, strengthening point defense for critical infrastructure and frontline units. Spain, meanwhile, has delivered a new and unusually large military aid package that includes additional weapons, equipment and air defense assets to reinforce Ukraine both at the front and in the rear. More on how these new systems enhance Ukraine's capabilities ahead.
Even more help and support. The German Chancellor has promised to equip the Ukrainian army with long-range weapon systems. But Merz did not disclose any details about the number of missiles or the delivery timelines.
For months, we have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government on implementing long-range fire projects, as we technically call them. The Ukrainian army will be equipped with such weapon systems.
At the same time, the Chancellor refused to answer the question about Germany's previous reluctance to supply Ukraine with Taurus long-range cruise missiles. He described this approach as a tactic to increase pressure on the aggressor country, Russia.
The possibility of operating the Taurus systems directly depends on the level of training of the technical personnel. That is, apparently, the point is that specifically only Bundeswehr military personnel can use the Taurus systems. And training Ukrainian specialists will take quite a significant amount of time.
Germany is the largest European donor of military aid to Ukraine. Since the beginning of the war, the government has provided Ukraine with assistance totaling more than 50 billion euros. In September, Berlin launched a new initiative to procure long-range drones jointly with Ukraine's defense industry. Germany will also allocate an additional 150 million euros to purchase weapons from the US for Kyiv.
Germany is well aware of the possibilities of direct military confrontation with the Russian Federation. That is why it is deeply invested in ensuring the defense capability of the Ukrainian state and accordingly in the technical rearmament of Ukraine's defense forces.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Air Force has strengthened its air defense with the new British Terrahawk Paladin weapon system. The number of units delivered has not been disclosed, but even a small batch of such systems will significantly bolster Ukraine's air defense.
For the Ukrainian side, this means creating a so-called point air defense system at the moment that is protecting key logistical and military facilities from being hit by the enemy's aerodynamic weapons, primarily referring to UAVs. This system is fully mobile and accordingly allows it to be redeployed to any location or area, and given its autonomous operation, this significantly increases and enhances Ukraine's ability to counter attacks from the Russian Federation at any given moment.
Spain will also allocate 615 million euros to support Ukraine, the lion's share of which is earmarked specifically for military needs.
First and foremost, this is a program for purchasing weapons for the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine from the United States. The second is accordingly the strengthening of Ukraine's air defense systems. And accordingly, this also includes logistical and technical support, including the transfer by the Spanish side of heavy armored vehicles and weaponry that are currently in service with the Spanish army.
After the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine ramped up weapons production and the implementation of new technologies, which are already being used on the front lines. The volume of domestic weapons production has increased by dozens of times.
Ukraine has scaled up production of the Bogdan self-propelled artillery systems to 20 units per month. These are record numbers even for NATO countries. The distinctive feature is that this is a modified 155mm caliber. This is the NATO standard. Plus, of course, the price-to-quality ratio. In addition, the defense forces of Ukraine have increased artillery shell production and have done so to a record level. And we are talking about scaling up the production of both FPV drones and accordingly strike drones with a target engagement range of over 1,500 kilometers.
Earlier, Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the production of domestic weapons, particularly ballistics and drones, is one of the key tasks for the authorities and manufacturers.
It is also worth noting the scaling up of the production of electronic warfare systems and radars. In this segment, once again, Ukroboronprom holds one of the leading positions in the world, and accordingly the production of naval munitions.
All of this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weaponry capable of destroying important enemy military targets deep behind the lines.
Under a proposed peace plan reportedly approved by Donald Trump, Russia would pay Ukraine a rental fee for control over Donbas, retaining de facto control while Ukraine keeps formal legal ownership of the territory. The proposal has sparked major controversy. European leaders warned that such terms could legitimize territorial seizures and set a dangerous precedent, while officials in Kyiv are demanding clarification and stress that any agreement must align with Ukraine's national interest and international law. In this report, what the plan actually includes, why Europe opposes it, and how Ukraine responds.
A plan without Ukraine, negotiations without Congress.
They're already discussing Ukraine selling it, reselling it, and selling it again.
The Donald Trump administration has given the green light to a peace plan consisting of 28 points. A document that was secretly developed over the past several weeks with representatives of the Russian Federation, but without Ukraine's participation.
The president made it clear that it's time to stop the killing and reach an agreement to end the war. Trump believes there is a chance to end this senseless war if flexibility is shown, a White House representative stated.
The chief architect of the plan was Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who, together with Russian negotiator Kirill Dmitriev, met in Miami to discuss the parameters of the future agreement. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner also participated in the development.
The plan focuses on providing both sides with security guarantees to ensure lasting peace. It includes what Ukraine wants and what it needs for a lasting peace, says one of the American officials.
The document itself is still being kept secret, but some of its details have become known to sources. So the 28 points are divided into 4 key sections: peace in Ukraine, security guarantees, security, Europe, and the future of U.S. relations with Russia and Ukraine. And although the White House assures that the plan contains what Ukraine wants and what it needs for lasting peace, the details of the project are raising more and more questions.
All their efforts have reached a dead end, and now they are apparently trying to break through on different fronts.
According to Western media, the plan envisions transferring territories in eastern Ukraine to Russia, primarily parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which are currently still under Kyiv's control. In effect, this is an agreement to Russia's demands regarding Donbas. Although it would have taken Moscow years to seize these territories by military means, currently Ukraine holds about 15% of the region. According to Trump's version, these zones are to become demilitarized formally under Russian control, but without the deployment of troops. At the same time, the terrorist state is supposedly going to pay rent for administering Donbas. Ukraine formally does not change its borders, but in reality allows Moscow to govern the territory for money. For the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, it is proposed to freeze the front line at its current positions. The details have not yet been disclosed. The plan also restricts the Ukrainian army, reducing its numbers, banning foreign missions, and imposing limitations on weapons systems, including long-range strike capabilities. The document mentions the winding down of American military aid and a ban on the deployment of Western troops on Ukrainian territory after the war ends. In effect, this is a rejection of joining NATO, which Moscow has been pushing for since 2014. In return, Russia promises not to attack Ukraine or other European countries, and to formalize this commitment in law.
It seems to me that the administration believes that what has changed is that Zelensky is now facing problems, and Zelensky is politically weakened from the White House's perspective. And perhaps that's why Trump is staying silent and not commenting on this in any way, so as not to, in some way, by such, draw more support to Zelensky by criticizing him. I understand that not every criticism will help Zelensky in his popularity, but in general, we see that the president is silent and we can just look for different reasons. But from the administration's point of view, they see that there is a scandal in Ukraine. They see that the president of Ukraine might now agree to a deal that he previously would not have agreed to. How much of this is actually true, we don't know, but we see that there are still efforts by Witkoff and Dmitriev who are trying to merge in their love ecstasy and start making money. And the main thing this administration wants, and what Russia wants, is for people to simply ignore Ukraine. But Ukraine continues to be a thorn in their side.
In addition, Trump's peace plan includes a provision for the recognition of the Russian language and guarantees for the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, whose position the Kremlin has been promoting for decades.
This is preparing Ukraine for absorption by the Russian Empire.
Across the ocean, the reaction is mixed. Some senators and congressmen learned about the project from the press. Lindsey Graham emphasized such a peace is only possible with firm security guarantees for Ukraine. Tom Bacon compared Trump's actions to Munich in 1938, warning that any attempt to appease the aggressor without involving the victim only accelerates new threats. In the US and Europe, it is believed that the plan can be adjusted after consultations with Kyiv, but skeptics are convinced that the proposed framework radically changes the balance of power, increases pressure from Russia, and weakens Ukraine's position. At the same time, the Trump administration insists that the goal of the document is to end the war and achieve long-term peace by using flexibility and negotiation mechanisms instead of military escalation.
The White House is preparing to impose new sanctions targeting Russia's oil sector. Measures already approved by Congress and backed personally by Donald Trump expected to take effect in the coming days. At the same time, Europe is working on restrictions against Russia's shadow fleet used to bypass price caps and oil embargoes. Together, these steps could significantly limit Russia's export capacity and alter the economic dynamics of the war, increasing pressure on Moscow to engage in negotiations with Kyiv. More about it in the next report.
The US and Europe are preparing a new wave of sanctions against Russia. The Europeans definitely deserve a big plus for openly discussing such, in my opinion, truly high-quality initiatives.
U.S. President Donald Trump has called on the Senate Republican Majority Leader to step up work on a bipartisan bill for new sanctions against Russia.
If you want to bring President Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table, no plan with 28 points or 12 points will work unless President Putin believes that we will continue ongoing military support for Ukraine and that we will go after those who buy cheap Russian oil.
According to the co-author of the bill, Lindsey Graham, Donald Trump signed the bill, making amendments that leave the final decision on their implementation and removal personally up to the President of the United States. This refers to the so-called draconian sanctions with huge tariffs on countries that purchase oil from the Russian Federation.
When it comes to the so-called shadow fleet, there are several measures the Europeans can do about it, since much of this activity takes place in areas much closer to them.
At the same time, Europe has stepped up its efforts to combat the Russian shadow fleet. Germany, France and Poland have proposed new measures to the EU against Russia's expanding shadow fleet, which allows Putin to freely trade oil around the world.
The Russians have learned how to circumvent the current sanctions restrictions regarding the shadow tanker fleet. By the way, the Russian Federation has amassed such a huge shadow tanker fleet that it now accounts for about 20% of all tankers in the world on planet Earth. That is, according to preliminary estimates, this is now about 1,000 tankers.
The proposed measures do not involve targeted actions against individual vessels, but rather sanctions against the companies that register them, insure them, and provide logistical services, particularly in European countries.
And by analyzing their documentation, it will be possible to determine where each vessel actually is and who is servicing these so-called shadow fleet tankers. This, of course, will help first of all to verify them much more effectively than before, and accordingly to impose the maximum possible sanctions on them, in other words, to prevent Russian oil and petroleum products from entering European markets.
According to Bloomberg, amid sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft, the price of Russian Urals oil has dropped to its lowest point in the past 2.5 years. Its current price is $36.61 per barrel. Future restrictions will deal an extremely painful blow to Putin's oil dollar cash cow.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!